"I think we work better as just companions now," she declared while giving me the key to our home, her ex having returned. I accepted it quietly and walked away for good. What I thought was the beginning of our shared future turned out to be just another chapter in her ongoing story, one where I was apparently a placeholder character waiting to be written out when someone more exciting entered the plot. I'm Trevor, and for 3 years I believed Jasmine and I were building something permanent together in Burlington, Vermont, where I worked as a municipal park ranger specializing in urban wildlife preservation while she edited documentary films focusing on nature conservancy projects. We'd spent months viewing properties, finally settling on a restored Victorian home with enough space for my field equipment and her editing suite, discussing everything from the mortgage terms to which bedroom would become her office to whether we wanted the master bathroom renovated immediately or could wait until next spring. Our routines had become sacred to me, and I thought to her as well. Morning coffee on the wraparound porch while I identified bird calls and she reviewed footage from the previous day, evening nature walks through the local preserve where I'd point out deer trails and she'd frame potential shots with her hands, weekend trips to craft fairs where we'd buy handmade pottery for our future kitchen and debate whether the antique dining table would fit through our front door. I loved how she'd get excited about capturing the perfect sunrise through our bedroom window, planning her camera angles weeks in advance, how she'd curl up against me while we discussed which native plants to add to our garden and where to install the bird feeding station I'd designed specifically for the local chickadee population, how she'd listen intently when I explained the migration patterns of the urban wildlife I monitored daily and ask thoughtful questions about habitat preservation. That showed she genuinely cared about my work. We'd even started discussing marriage in abstract terms, nothing concrete yet but enough that I'd begun researching engagement rings and thinking about whether to propose during our annual camping trip to Acadia National Park or wait until we'd officially closed on the house and could celebrate both milestones together. Everything changed when Dominic returned from Madagascar with a year's worth of footage documenting endangered species, claiming he had enough material for a potential National Geographic series that could launch both their careers into the stratosphere and establish them as the premier wildlife documentary team of their generation. I watched our carefully constructed life dissolve as Jasmine became obsessed with the project's possibilities, spending 12-hour days reviewing raw footage in our guest room turned temporary editing bay, discussing distribution strategies and network contacts with Dominic until 2 in the morning while I lay alone in our bed listening to their animated conversations about lens choices and narrative structure and which celebrity narrator might be willing to work with relatively unknown filmmakers. Our morning coffee routine disappeared first, replaced by Jasmine rushing out early to meet Dominic at various locations around town for additional planning sessions. Then our evening walks vanished as she claimed exhaustion from the intensive editing process that somehow required Dominic's constant presence and input despite the fact that she'd edited dozens of projects independently over the past 5 years. I tried to be supportive, bringing her meals during long editing sessions, asking thoughtful questions about the project's progress, even suggesting ways the documentary could highlight local conservation efforts I was familiar with and offering to introduce them to wildlife experts from my professional network, but she'd grown distant and distracted, responding to my efforts with distracted nods and dismissive comments about how I couldn't possibly understand the pressure of working on something this significant for their careers or the complex creative decisions they were facing daily. The devastating moment arrived on a rainy Thursday evening when I returned from a particularly challenging day tracking an injured fox family through downtown Burlington, looking forward to our usual dinner together and maybe watching one of her nature documentaries while sharing stories from our respective days and planning our weekend hiking trip to Mount Mansfield. Instead, I found Jasmine waiting in our living room with a strange expression I'd never seen before, something between guilt and excitement and determination, holding our house key in her palm like it was evidence of something she needed to confess or a symbol of the life she was about to abandon. She explained that she and Dominic had been offered an opportunity to work exclusively with a production company that required total focus and commitment, that she needed to follow this path without any distractions or obligations holding her back, and that while she valued what we'd built together over the past 3 years, she thought we worked better as just companions rather than romantic partners planning a future together because the intensity of this career opportunity demanded everything she had to give. I stood there processing her words while rain drummed against the windows of what I'd thought was becoming our home, realizing she was essentially breaking up with me to pursue a career opportunity with her former film school partner. Assuming I'd understand and remain her supportive friend throughout this transition, as if our romantic relationship had been some kind of casual arrangement rather than a serious commitment we'd both invested years of our lives building. She handed me the key with tears in her eyes, explaining that she'd already signed a lease on a studio apartment closer to downtown where she and Dominic could work without interruption, that she hoped I'd be happy for her success and understand this was about following her dreams rather than choosing him over me, and that maybe someday when the documentary was finished and their careers were established we could reconnect as the good friends we'd always been underneath the romantic complications that had apparently made our relationship too limiting for her artistic ambitions. I quietly pocketed the key without argument, accepting her decision with the same calm dignity I used when relocating injured wildlife, understanding that forcing someone to stay never creates genuine partnership but only breeds resentment and further heartbreak. I spent that night packing my ranger gear, field notebooks, camping equipment, and the few personal items I'd accumulated during our time together into my pickup truck, loading everything methodically while Jasmine stayed at Dominic's temporary apartment to give me space she claimed, though I suspected she simply couldn't bear to witness the dismantling of what we'd built together or face the practical reality of her choice. By dawn I was driving north toward New Hampshire where my sister Emma ran a small organic farm with her husband, needing somewhere quiet to process this betrayal while figuring out my next steps professionally and personally without the constant reminders of our shared life that surrounded me in Burlington. Emma didn't ask many questions when I appeared on her doorstep with a truck full of belongings and probably the most defeated expression she'd ever seen on my face. Just handed me coffee and pointed toward the guest room that became my temporary refuge for the next several weeks as I slept on her couch and helped with farm chores while trying to understand how someone could abandon 3 years of partnership so easily for a career opportunity that might not even materialize. I threw myself into physical labor during those healing weeks, repairing fence lines and clearing overgrown trails on Emma's property, finding comfort in work that produced tangible results unlike the emotional confusion and unanswered questions Jasmine had left in her wake when she'd chosen excitement over stability. Emma occasionally tried to get me talking about what had happened, but mostly she just let me work through my feelings while contributing something useful to the farm, understanding that some wounds need time and physical exhaustion rather than conversation to begin healing properly. 8 months later, while I was finally considering permanent positions with Vermont Fish and Wildlife and contemplating whether to return to Burlington or start fresh somewhere completely different, the U.S. Forest Service contacted me about a coveted position developing wildlife corridor programs in the remote forests of northern Idaho, near the Canadian border, where endangered lynx populations needed protection and innovative conservation strategies. The job description read like something I'd written myself during my most ambitious career fantasies, combining field research with habitat design and requiring someone with exactly my specialized background in urban wildlife management who could adapt those skills to wilderness settings where traditional conservation approaches had proven insufficient. I immediately accepted without visiting the location first or negotiating salary details, recognizing this as the kind of opportunity that could define my entire career while providing the geographic distance I needed to heal completely from Jasmine's abandonment and build something entirely new for myself. Trading Vermont's familiar deciduous forests for the challenging wilderness of the Idaho Panhandle felt like stepping into a completely different world, where tracking predator movements and designing habitat bridges would provide both professional growth and emotional healing among some of the most pristine wilderness areas remaining in the continental United States. The work proved more demanding and rewarding than anything I'd done in Vermont, requiring me to hike miles through dense forest daily while monitoring GPS collars on lynx families, identifying natural corridors that could be enhanced to connect fragmented habitats across vast mountainous terrain, and developing innovative solutions for wildlife movement patterns that had never been attempted in this region. Meanwhile, I occasionally checked Jasmine's social media during my first few weeks in Idaho, watching her initial posts celebrate her collaboration with Dominic through behind-the-scenes shots from their editing sessions and excited captions about breakthrough moments in their creative process and networking opportunities with industry professionals. However, Her posts gradually became more defensive and less frequent over the following months, with subtle hints about unexpected obstacles and creative disagreements that suggested their dream project wasn't progressing as smoothly as she'd anticipated when she'd sacrificed our relationship for this supposed career-defining opportunity. I found myself feeling oddly detached from her struggles, like reading about strangers in a newspaper rather than someone who'd shared my bed and planned my future, realizing that genuine healing meant letting go of both resentment and concern for someone who'd chosen temporary excitement over long-term partnership. The mountain wilderness provided a kind of therapy that no counselor could match, with daily challenges that required complete focus and problem-solving skills while surrounded by natural beauty that reminded me why I'd chosen conservation work in the first place and why building something lasting was more valuable than chasing momentary opportunities. By winter I'd stopped checking her social media entirely, too absorbed in learning the complex ecosystem dynamics of my new territory and developing innovative solutions for lynx habitat connectivity to waste emotional energy on someone who'd made her priorities abundantly clear 8 months earlier when she'd handed me that key. In Idaho's remote forests, I began collaborating with Brenna, a wildlife biologist and former National Park Service researcher who coordinated federal endangered species recovery programs across the region, bringing years of experience with predator tracking and habitat restoration that complemented my urban wildlife background perfectly. Our working relationship developed naturally through long days tracking lynx families and nights analyzing GPS collar data in temporary research cabins scattered throughout the wilderness, discussing conservation strategies without any romantic pressure or hidden agendas, just two professionals who shared genuine passion for wildlife preservation and understood the dedication required for meaningful conservation work. I appreciated how Brenna approached our partnership with the same methodical precision I valued, treating our collaboration as a serious scientific endeavor rather than an opportunity for drama or personal advancement. And she seemed equally grateful to work with someone who understood that protecting endangered species required patient observation and careful planning rather than impulsive decisions based on momentary excitement. Our initial project focused on mapping lynx movement patterns throughout the northern Idaho wilderness, using sophisticated GPS collar technology to track family groups as they navigated the challenging terrain, identifying bottlenecks where natural corridors had been disrupted by human development or natural disasters, and designing innovative solutions that could reconnect fragmented habitats without interfering with existing ecosystem dynamics. Trevor's innovative wildlife corridor design successfully reconnected fragmented habitats for the first time in decades, allowing lynx populations to expand their territory beyond the artificial boundaries that had confined them for years, creating new opportunities for genetic diversity and population growth that had seemed impossible before our intervention. The success became evident when we documented the first cross-territory movement of a lynx family in over 15 years, with GPS data showing a mother and her cubs successfully navigating our newly designed corridor system to access previously isolated hunting grounds, proving that thoughtful conservation planning could overcome seemingly insurmountable habitat fragmentation challenges. Our preliminary results earned recognition from the Fish and Wildlife Service and environmental science publications, bringing attention to our methods and generating funding opportunities for expanding the corridor project throughout the entire northwestern United States, validating the approach we developed through months of careful observation and collaborative problem-solving. Meanwhile, back in Vermont, Jasmine's documentary project began imploding as Dominic's perfectionist demands and refusal to compromise with network executives created impossible deadlines and budget overruns that threatened to derail the entire production, according to industry contacts who occasionally shared gossip about failed projects during professional conferences I attended virtually. I learned through mutual acquaintances that Dominic had become increasingly difficult to work with, demanding complete creative control while lacking the practical experience necessary to manage complex production schedules, leaving Jasmine to handle the technical editing work while he pursued networking opportunities that rarely materialized into actual contracts or distribution deals. The irony wasn't lost on me that while Jasmine had abandoned our stable partnership to chase excitement with someone who promised career advancement, I'd found both professional fulfillment and personal growth by focusing on meaningful work rather than dramatic relationships or get-rich-quick schemes disguised as artistic opportunities. Brenna and I spent long winter evenings in our research cabin reviewing data and planning the next phase of corridor expansion, conversations that flowed naturally from technical discussions about habitat connectivity to personal stories about what had drawn us to conservation work, creating the kind of intellectual and emotional intimacy that I'd thought existed with Jasmine but now recognized had been largely one-sided. By spring, our professional collaboration had evolved into something deeper, built on mutual respect and shared values rather than the performative romance that had characterized my relationship with Jasmine, where genuine partnership meant supporting each other's conservation goals while maintaining individual professional identity and personal integrity. Trevor's corridor project expanded dramatically when his methods proved effective during a crisis involving a mother lynx and cubs trapped by a forest fire, leading to his promotion as Regional Wildlife Recovery Coordinator and a federal conservation award that validated years of patient research and innovative thinking. The emergency began when lightning strikes ignited a wildfire in late summer, threatening to cut off a lynx family from their established territory and forcing them into an area where survival would be nearly impossible due to lack of suitable prey and shelter options. I coordinated with firefighting teams and emergency wildlife response units to implement an unprecedented rescue operation, using our existing corridor data to identify safe evacuation routes and temporary habitat areas where the family could shelter until the fire passed and their original territory became accessible again. The success of this operation, documented through GPS collar tracking and aerial surveillance, demonstrated that our corridor system could serve multiple conservation purposes beyond routine habitat connectivity, providing crucial emergency pathways during natural disasters and climate-related crises that were becoming increasingly common throughout the region. My promotion to Regional Wildlife Recovery Coordinator came with expanded responsibilities for developing corridor programs throughout the northwestern United States. Recognition that my Vermont background in urban wildlife management had translated successfully to wilderness settings, and funding for a team of researchers who could implement similar projects across different ecosystems. The Federal Conservation Award ceremony took place in Washington, D.C., where I accepted recognition on behalf of our entire team while thinking about how different this moment felt from the partnership I'd once imagined building with Jasmine, realizing that genuine achievement came from years of dedicated work rather than dramatic career pivots or opportunistic collaborations. My relationship with Brenna evolved naturally during a week-long backcountry survey when we were snowed in at a remote research station, spending days analyzing data and nights talking about our respective paths into conservation work, sharing stories about what drove us to choose careers dedicated to protecting endangered species rather than pursuing more lucrative or socially prestigious options. The isolation provided space for conversations that might have felt awkward in our usual professional settings, allowing us to explore personal topics while maintaining the respectful dynamic that had characterized our working relationship. Discussing everything from childhood experiences in nature to graduate school challenges to the sacrifices we'd both made to build careers focused on environmental protection rather than personal advancement. I appreciated how Brenna approached potential romance with the same thoughtful consideration she brought to habitat restoration, recognizing that meaningful relationships required patience and careful observation rather than impulsive decisions based on temporary chemistry or convenience. Qualities that made her fundamentally different from Jasmine in ways that became increasingly obvious as we spent uninterrupted time together. Our first kiss happened spontaneously while we were reviewing GPS data on the final night of our snowbound week, neither of us planning the moment but both recognizing it felt natural and right, built on months of genuine partnership and mutual respect rather than the performative romance that had characterized my previous relationship where grand gestures had substituted for authentic connection. When we returned to our regular fieldwork schedule, our relationship continued developing organically through shared projects and quiet evenings rather than dramatic declarations or artificial milestones, with both of us understanding that true partnership meant supporting each other's conservation goals while maintaining individual professional identity and personal integrity. The success story got featured in National Wildlife magazine with photos of Trevor installing motion sensor cameras along the corridor, earning recognition from conservation organizations nationwide and generating speaking opportunities at environmental conferences where our methods could influence wildlife management practices across diverse ecosystems. Meanwhile, Jasmine's documentary completely collapsed when Dominic abandoned the project for a lucrative television contract, leaving her with massive debt from equipment rentals and a failed Kickstarter campaign that had promised backers exclusive access to behind-the-scenes content and advanced screening opportunities that would never materialize. I learned about her situation through industry contacts who mentioned the project's failure during conference networking sessions, describing how Dominic had used the Madagascar footage to secure his television deal while leaving Jasmine legally responsible for production costs and contractual obligations they'd accumulated during their collaboration. The irony struck me that while Jasmine had sacrificed our stable partnership to chase exciting opportunities with someone who promised career advancement, I'd found both professional fulfillment and personal happiness by focusing on meaningful work with someone who shared my values and commitment to conservation rather than viewing relationships as stepping stones to greater success or social status. Jasmine tracked down Trevor's Idaho field station through the Forest Service directory and appeared unannounced, claiming to be researching a documentary about wildlife corridor innovation but clearly there for personal reconciliation rather than professional purposes. A transparent excuse that fooled nobody given her obvious emotional distress and complete lack of legitimate filming equipment or crew. I was reviewing GPS data in the Sandpoint field office when my colleague mentioned that someone was asking about me at the front desk, describing a woman with editing equipment who claimed to be working on a conservation documentary and specifically requested information about my corridor projects throughout northern Idaho. My first instinct was professional curiosity about potential media coverage for our work, but something about the description triggered a familiar unease that I couldn't immediately identify, making me approach the lobby with caution rather than the enthusiasm I usually felt when discussing conservation achievements with interested journalists or filmmakers. The moment I saw Jasmine standing there with a single camera and notebook, looking exhausted and desperate rather than confident and professional, I realized she'd traveled across the country not for any documentary project but because she'd somehow learned about my success and decided to insert herself back into my life when her own career had completely collapsed. She looked smaller than I remembered, her usual polished appearance replaced by something that suggested months of stress and financial strain, wearing clothes that seemed too large and carrying equipment that appeared borrowed rather than professionally owned, creating an overall impression of someone trying to maintain a facade while everything underneath had fallen apart. During our awkward meeting at a small-town diner near Sandpoint, Jasmine broke down and admitted that Dominic had left her financially ruined and emotionally shattered, abandoning their documentary project the moment a better opportunity arose, leaving her responsible for thousands of dollars in equipment rental fees and contractual obligations while he pursued his television contract without any concern for the partnership they'd supposedly built together. She confessed that she'd destroyed our relationship thinking I would remain available indefinitely as her backup plan, assuming that my steady personality and deep feelings for her meant I'd wait around like some loyal dog while she explored more exciting options, only to discover that walking away from someone doesn't guarantee the ability to walk back when circumstances change. The conversation became increasingly painful as she explained how she'd spent months trying to salvage the documentary project alone, working 18-hour days to complete editing work that required both technical skills and creative vision while dealing with creditors and angry investors who demanded results from a project that no longer had adequate funding or distribution prospects. I learned that her financial situation had become desperate enough that she'd lost her apartment and been forced to move back in with her parents in Vermont, a humiliating retreat that had destroyed her self-image as an independent creative professional and left her questioning every decision she'd made since Dominic's return from Madagascar had disrupted our stable life together. She admitted that discovering my success through industry publications and social media had made her realize what she'd abandoned, not just the relationship itself but the security and genuine partnership that she'd taken for granted while chasing the validation and adrenaline rush of high-profile projects that had ultimately proved to be nothing more than elaborate fantasies. Jasmine asked if I thought we could try again, explaining that she'd learned valuable lessons about the difference between exciting opportunities and meaningful work, claiming that her experience with Dominic had taught her to appreciate stability and genuine commitment rather than seeking constant drama and external validation through career achievements. I remained kind but resolute throughout our conversation, explaining that I'd built a future with Brenna based on shared values and commitment rather than chasing fleeting opportunities, that our relationship represented everything I'd thought existed with Jasmine but had actually been building toward all along without realizing it until finding someone who truly shared my priorities. The most difficult part was watching Jasmine struggle to accept that her choice to prioritize career excitement over stable partnership had irreversible consequences, that some decisions create permanent changes that can't be undone simply because circumstances shift or better options fail to materialize as expected. I felt genuine sympathy for her situation while recognizing that her current desperation stemmed not from missing our relationship specifically but from realizing that she'd gambled away security for excitement and lost everything when the excitement proved temporary and artificial, leaving her with nothing but regret and the knowledge that she'd destroyed something valuable for something worthless. When our conversation ended, I walked her to her rental car and wished her well sincerely, understanding that she was facing consequences that would require years to overcome and hoping she could eventually build something meaningful from the ruins of her poor decisions, though I knew that rebuilding her life was work she'd have to do alone rather than expecting others to provide the stability she'd rejected. When Jasmine followed Trevor to his and Brenna's shared cabin near Lake Pend Oreille that evening, Brenna responded with professional courtesy, offering hot cocoa and patiently listening to Jasmine's attempts to justify her past decisions as necessary artistic growth while maintaining the calm dignity that characterized her approach to both wildlife conservation and personal relationships. I had called ahead to warn Brenna about Jasmine's unexpected arrival and emotional state, explaining the situation honestly while trusting her to handle whatever drama might unfold with the same measured wisdom she brought to managing complex ecosystem restoration projects that required balancing multiple stakeholder interests and competing conservation priorities. Brenna's reaction surprised me with its complete lack of jealousy or defensiveness, instead treating Jasmine like a wounded animal that needed careful observation rather than aggressive confrontation, understanding that desperate people often lash out when cornered and that providing a safe space for honest conversation would reveal more about the situation than hostile interrogation or territorial behavior. The three of us sat around our kitchen table while Jasmine explained her perspective on the choices that had led to this moment, describing her relationship with Dominic as an artistic awakening that had initially felt like personal and professional growth, though she admitted now that much of what she'd interpreted as creative expansion had actually been validation addiction disguised as career development. Jasmine admitted she had been addicted to the validation and adrenaline rush of high-profile projects, constantly seeking external confirmation of her worth through increasingly dramatic career moves rather than finding satisfaction in steady professional growth and meaningful personal relationships that didn't provide the same kind of immediate emotional payoff she'd become dependent upon since film school. She explained that working with Dominic had made her feel important and sophisticated in ways that our quiet Vermont life together had never provided, confessing that she'd mistaken excitement and uncertainty for passion while viewing Trevor's consistency and reliability as limitations rather than recognizing them as the foundation for genuine security and long-term happiness. The conversation revealed how thoroughly Jasmine had convinced herself that dramatic career opportunities represented personal growth while stable partnerships meant settling for less than she deserved, a mindset that had prevented her from appreciating Trevor's steadiness and genuine partnership until losing both had forced her to confront the difference between temporary excitement and lasting fulfillment. Brenna listened without judgment while Jasmine worked through her rationalizations and regrets, occasionally asking thoughtful questions that helped clarify the emotional dynamics involved without making Jasmine feel attacked or defensive, treating the situation like a research project where understanding all variables was necessary before drawing conclusions about cause and effect relationships. I watched Brenna demonstrate the kind of emotional intelligence and mature perspective that had drawn me to her initially, seeing how she could remain compassionate towards someone who represented a threat to our relationship while maintaining clear boundaries about what behavior was acceptable and what consequences were appropriate for poor decisions. When Jasmine finally asked directly whether there was any possibility of rekindling our relationship, Brenna calmly made it clear that Trevor had found someone who appreciated his consistency rather than finding it limiting, someone who valued his thoughtful approach to building lasting partnerships rather than seeking constant drama and external validation through professional achievements or romantic relationships. The contrast between the two women became starkest during this moment, with Jasmine's emotional volatility and desperate need for reassurance highlighting Brenna's calm confidence and secure sense of self-worth that didn't require constant external validation or dramatic gestures to maintain stability and personal satisfaction. Brenna explained that healthy relationships were built on mutual respect and shared values rather than passionate intensity or emotional manipulation, that genuine partnership meant supporting each other's goals while maintaining individual identity rather than expecting partners to provide constant excitement or validation for personal worth through grand romantic gestures or career achievements. The conversation concluded when Brenna gently but firmly suggested that Jasmine's healing process would require accepting responsibility for her choices rather than seeking absolution from the people she'd hurt, understanding that genuine growth meant learning from mistakes rather than expecting forgiveness to erase consequences or restore relationships that had been damaged beyond repair. The next morning, Jasmine departed Idaho permanently after a quiet breakfast where we exchanged polite goodbyes and genuine wishes for her future success, though all three of us understood that her journey back to stability would be long and difficult and would need to happen far away from the life Trevor and Brenna were building together. After her departure, Trevor blocked her across all platforms not from bitterness but to protect the peaceful life he'd cultivated with Brenna and maintain healthy emotional boundaries that prevented past drama from interfering with present happiness, recognizing that some chapters needed to remain closed for new stories to develop properly without unnecessary complications or backward-looking emotional entanglements. Trevor and Brenna relocated to Missoula, Montana, where Trevor directed a new program developing climate-adaptive wildlife corridors while Brenna led community education initiatives for rural conservation programs throughout the Northern Rockies, their professional advancement occurring naturally through demonstrated expertise rather than dramatic career pivots or opportunistic networking strategies that prioritized immediate recognition over sustainable growth. The University of Montana offered us both positions that combined academic research with field implementation, allowing us to expand our corridor methodology to address climate change impacts on wildlife migration patterns while training the next generation of conservation biologists in practical habitat restoration techniques that could be applied across diverse ecosystems throughout the western United States. Our relationship deepened through shared fieldwork and quiet evenings rather than grand romantic gestures, with both of us understanding that true partnership meant supporting each other's conservation goals while maintaining individual professional identity, creating the kind of stable foundation that allowed us to pursue ambitious projects without sacrificing personal happiness or relationship security for career advancement. I appreciated how Brenna approached our life together with the same thoughtful planning she brought to ecosystem restoration, discussing major decisions thoroughly while respecting each other's autonomy and professional ambitions, never expecting either of us to sacrifice individual goals for relationship maintenance or demanding constant validation through dramatic declarations or expensive symbolic gestures. Our Montana cabin became a gathering place for visiting researchers and graduate students working on conservation projects throughout the region, hosting informal seminars where we discuss innovative approaches to wildlife management while preparing simple meals and sharing stories about field experiences that had shaped our understanding of ecosystem dynamics and conservation challenges. The work proved more fulfilling than anything either of us had accomplished independently, combining our respective expertise to develop conservation strategies that addressed both immediate habitat needs and long-term climate adaptation requirements, creating solutions that could be scaled across multiple ecosystems while training local communities to implement maintenance protocols that ensured project sustainability beyond our direct involvement. When Brenna posted a sunrise photo of Trevor installing a wildlife camera in Glacier National Park with the caption, "Patient work creates lasting paths," the image captured something essential about our approach to both conservation and relationships, emphasizing consistency and dedication over dramatic moments or social media performance that prioritized image management over authentic achievement. The post generated hundreds of comments from conservation professionals worldwide, sharing their own experiences with habitat restoration projects and discussing the importance of long-term thinking in both environmental protection and personal relationships, creating conversations about sustainability that extended beyond wildlife management to encompass broader questions about building meaningful careers and lasting partnerships. Jasmine briefly liked the post before permanently deleting all her social media accounts, a gesture that felt like final acknowledgement that her attempts to rebuild connections with her past had failed and that her healing process would require complete disconnection from the life she'd abandoned when she'd chosen excitement over stability 3 years earlier. I felt no satisfaction from this small victory, recognizing that Jasmine's struggles represented genuine human suffering even though her choices had created the circumstances that led to her current isolation and financial difficulties. Understanding that vindication meant building something better rather than celebrating someone else's failures or missed opportunities. Our success stemmed from choosing partnership over competition, stability over excitement, and meaningful work over dramatic gestures, principles that guided both our conservation efforts and our relationship while providing the foundation for achievements that would benefit wildlife populations and conservation science for generations beyond our own careers and personal satisfaction. Trevor experienced profound contentment knowing that while some people chase spotlight moments and temporary validation through dramatic career moves or relationship changes, others dedicate themselves to creating enduring positive change that will benefit wildlife for generations to come, finding fulfillment through patient work rather than immediate recognition or external validation. The corridor projects we developed in Idaho and Montana became models for conservation programs throughout North America, with federal agencies adopting our methodologies for protecting endangered species across diverse ecosystems, proving that thoughtful planning and consistent implementation could achieve results that dramatic interventions and opportunistic collaborations rarely sustained beyond initial publicity phases. Brenna and I began discussing marriage not as a romantic milestone or social expectation but as a practical partnership that would allow us to pursue increasingly ambitious conservation goals while maintaining the personal stability that had enabled our professional success. Recognizing that genuine commitment meant choosing each other repeatedly rather than relying on passionate declarations or expensive ceremonies to maintain relationship security. Our evening conversations often returned to questions about legacy and meaning, discussing how individual choices ripple outward to influence broader conservation efforts and social values, understanding that our decision to prioritize substance over style in both work and relationships contributed to cultural shifts that valued patience and dedication over immediate gratification and dramatic transformation. The mountain wilderness continued providing perspective on what truly mattered in life, reminding us daily that meaningful achievements required years of consistent effort rather than moments of inspiration or opportunity, that building something lasting meant accepting responsibility for long-term consequences rather than chasing temporary excitement or external validation through career advancement or relationship drama that ultimately proved hollow and unsustainable.